We had these lilies in a vase, and as I saw these bad boys like coming out across the room at me, I thought, well, fuck me, it's on here. And then I walk into the kitchen, and I was struggling to settle down, but I walked into the kitchen, and the kitchen cupboards reconfigured around me, and I'm watching me, and then I thought, you're completely gone.
Yeah.
So you've got no choice. At which point,
you're here now.
That was it, and I kind of conceded that it was time to hand over, and then had what I can only describe as the biggest meltdown. Lots of tears for an extended period, and it was. This is maybe a strange phrase, but it felt like tears from years ago.
Yes,
So
I know exactly what you mean.
Huge release.
Yeah.
And it was uber intense.
Welcome to another episode of Big Risk Energy. On this podcast, we talk to an amazing range of people. We talk to these people about risk. Risk they've taken in their lives, risk they've taken in their careers, when they paid off, and when they didn't.
And on this episode, I am blessed to be joined by the one and only Rachel Murphy. Rachel is the CEO and founder of the Grafter. She's a multi-exited entrepreneur and also non-exec for multiple companies too. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Brill, thanks. Delighted to be here.
So I'm so excited to speak to you because we've had just an amazing conversation for the last half an hour before we started recording about lots of different things. And there's so many things that I do want to discuss with you, but tell us a little bit about your journey as an exit entrepreneur, your approach to growth, because I know that's something which you're an absolute leader on. Would be good to get a bit of the background there.
Yeah, of course. So my journey into building companies started in my early 20s. I knew. First of all, I'm not great with authority. I think that's probably the best opener. And I kind of knew I wanted to forge my own way. I didn't go to uni, because I knew I'd get pissed and never get a degree. So I kind of thought to myself, it was consultancy that I fancied building, but I didn't really have that experience. So the first probably 3 or 4 years, I worked for Big Five consultancy just as an interim, picked up the skills pretty rapidly, and then built out my first. Consultancy is probably doing it a bit more justice than it was. Recruitment company, really. And we were supplying teams of people to implement a web-based piece of social care software around the UK. So ran that one for a couple of years. And then, then went back and thought I want to go and do more turnaround and transformation work and really earn my stripes a bit more. So worked across public and private sector, had some big gigs, led the services business for Kia, the construction company, then ended up in kind of central government, was CIO for Department for Education in the UK, and then led the patient-facing transformation of the NHS for a couple of years. So big roles. Wow. But at the end of that gig, I kind of thought to myself, lots of the suppliers, it's all a bit samey. And I, at that time, would have been late 30s. And I thought, now's the time. You've got 20 years more experience. I kind of hoped I was a bit more mature. And went and built Difrent. So Difrent was the second company that I'd built. And yeah, it was fucking brilliant. Just loved it right from the off. So we were designing and building services across government and healthcare. And I knew going into that business that it was in and out over a 5-year period. So I had something to prove. I wanted to build, scale and exit during that period.
Amazing. And I just want to go back to working for, which department of government was it?
For Department for Education.
Department for Education.
Yep.
So how did working with government match up with the problems with authority, and was there any tension there? How did you feel during that time?
So that's a great question, and I guess for me, I'm a little masochistic, so I like putting me in.
All founders are, right?
Yeah, totally. I like putting me in the trickiest place imaginable. So there's nothing about my personality that should ever have been sitting on the board of a government department.
Right.
And that I thought was, I think I was expecting like absolute miracles, Roy, if I'm honest. I thought as the first board I'm going to sit on, I'm going to see amazing things. I was sorely disappointed. But what it did for me really was it gave me exposure to running a huge team with a massive budget, and the scale of the role kind of blew my mind. But in way of me towing the line, that was a recurring challenge. And I was pretty clear right from the outset that, I could get the transformation of the department done, but I would need top cover. So, my boss's job would be apologising for me executing, and that was his new gig. So if he was up for that, I was game.
Amazing.
So it was an interesting experience, probably the toughest role I've ever done.
Right. And is that because you had to operate within those confines and restraints, or
I think it was
bureaucracy, or
I think it was combination of both. It's proper old school as well, and every aspect of it was, I found, very tricky to manage. I swore I would never do another public sector role after that. Obviously found myself in one about half an hour later, but got short memories in way of these things. And I'm heavily driven to make a difference as well. And I think that's why, the public sector appealed.
Makes a lot of sense. And tell us about selling Difrent and that experience. So
selling Difrent, oh God, the sale process was challenging. So if I set the scene, we were doing probably 70% of our number in healthcare, 30% in central government. It was 2020, so we're right in the heart of the pandemic. We are building the home testing service for COVID-19 for the UK as a business. I was personally shielding because I'm chronically asthmatic. And I'm going through the process of selling the company. It was fucking crazy. It all kind of kicked off with the Christmas before the pandemic started, so 2019, back end of, I had the first approach about selling the business. And my gut feel was not the right company. And then kind of fast forward sort of March time of 2020, probably a bit further, May, June time.
So into lockdown at this point.
Into lockdown. And I'm properly locked down, so I'm isolating. I didn't go near a supermarket for like 12 weeks, which was a result actually, because I can't stand that sort of stuff. But it was an intense period. And, once we had interest from one potential buyer, it was then kind of imperative, really. We got 2 or 3 others in the mix. So we went through that process, and I found the whole experience particularly hard going, because as the founder of the business, I was writing a lot of the number for Difrent, so a lot of the new business sat with me. So of course you take your eye off that to look at the due diligence and other bits and pieces. It has a direct impact on the on the growth of the business during that period. So that was interesting. I had an amazing lawyer who sat along side as part of the process, but it was, I found it emotionally very tough, if I'm honest. Not the negotiation, but getting my head and my heart in the right place around selling something that was like my baby. I cared deeply about the people that work for the business, matching the culture of a potential buyer to the business that I built was really important to me. So it was hardcore. It was a great experience. Again, there's a theme emerging here, but I swore I'd never do it again. And now I've just built a bloody business that is helping founders to exit. So obviously I enjoyed it more than I thought I did. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think it's a really interesting point, because for me, when I sold my first company, Real Sport, back in 2018, that due diligence process distraction, yes, exactly in the way that you described, but also a fucking roller coaster. I mean, when you're going through disclosure letters, when you're creating indemnities and warrants that are on yourself as founders and directors, and you're having to, tie your name to things that you haven't necessarily been so involved with, because as a scaling, technology company, right, you're signing off things, you're disclosing things that actually you may have had no prior knowledge of, and it was one of the most challenging periods of my life from like a mental health perspective, selling the company, because it's, especially at that time, I had, I was in debt personally, in a big way. I had credit card debt, payday loans, all these things, because we weren't paying ourselves. We didn't think we should. I was young, didn't really know what I was doing. And the swing of like, well, I could be a, self-made millionaire at 26, or be lumped with all this debt still. So I think it's amazing that you're helping founders through that process. And how much of it is a mental game?
A lot of it is 200%, I would say, because the reality is once you're into that process, I think it's like buying a house, and you go around a house and you fall in love with it. You've got to be really careful, because at that point you're giving the game away, that, you're up for it. And when you're going through the sale of a business, it's the same. So for me, I know with me, if I'm on a path, I will sometimes find it hard to say, is this actually the right path? Because I'm, like digging in, and I want to make it happen. I mean, it wasn't straightforward, that process at all. There was a few, roller coasters, a great example. We had kickoffs with a potential buyer. All of those bits that, you could say, were they, sort of a bit of alarm bells for the future. But the reality is, it was a great deal. If I had my time again, I would do the same deal with the same company.
Great.
I found the exit, working through that exit period, I found that really hard going.
As in like post-transaction?
Yeah, post-transaction, because the reality is you do then have a boss again.
Yes.
They're calling the shots. Whatever they tell you you're going to be doing, or the strategy is, obviously that, normally changes half an hour later.
Yeah.
And I struggled a lot. And I don't want to be part of a 1,000-person company.
Yes.
I want, I like building something from nothing. I like making things happen. But that kind of, much larger entity, not for me.
Yeah.
So I found that really, and I would have been a pain in the arse to manage. So this wasn't one-sided, poor me. I'd have been a right handful.
Yeah. Honestly, it's so interesting to hear you say that, and reflects so much of my own journey with that. We went from, startup to being acquired by a publicly listed company.
Same.
Right. Yeah. And then looking at the joys of and pains of quarterly results rather than building for the long term, and the strategy that you thought you were going to get involved with and what the integration was going to look like was not necessarily what it looked like. So I had a year lock-in period. We sold the company March 13th, 2018. Both me and my co-founder at the time handed in our notices March 14th, 2019. Yeah.
So I had an 18-month.
Okay.
And the morning of the 18-month, I said, that's it, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And the reality is, you kind of know yourself. And I knew, if I make a commitment, I'm honouring that commitment.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be out. And my instinct when I first got out was, go again. And it's like, you can't, because I was absolutely fucked.
Yes.
I really needed some serious downtime.
Yeah.
And I needed to decompress. And I needed to understand what I'd been through and kind of recognise that. I would say my mental health at the end of that period was worse than it was going through it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So for me, that was when I then, I kind of thought, what I initially thought was take 6 months out completely and don't work. I think that managed to be about 3. But that's a long period for a me type.
Yeah.
I need work because it's structure. Without structure, I feared I might get locked up. So I was kind of nervous, thinking, do you know what I mean? What's going to happen? I've got to deal with this brain all day, every day, and it's lively. So yeah,
100%. Literally same thing. And we were talking about this on a podcast yesterday. We had a really successful entrepreneur on, a guy called Ben White, sold his company for I think it was over 600 mil. Amazing. And exact same situation, not knowing what to do when the music stops in that sense. Terrifying, right? Absolutely is. And you know, he's been in recovery and what's your view on the correlation between entrepreneurialism, exiting, recovery, addiction? All of these things seem to just time and time again go hand in hand.
It's a great question, that. So I'm 9.5 years sober, and you know, the reality is I needed some help and I asked for it, and I'm you know, will forever be kind of grateful that I got that help. But I was talking to a mate in recovery over dinner on Monday evening, and I wouldn't change any of it because I now know, you know, it is a superpower. It's the same. I'm ADHD. Yep. It's the same as that. If you can channel it, and it's very hard to channel it when you're 5 or 6. Do you know what I mean? You know, you're just classified as the naughty one. But at 45, I can channel it, not all the time, and sometimes I still think, fuck it. Do you know what I mean? I'm doing it. But it is a conscious decision at 45. But the I think the drive, my drive is absolutely relentless, and I put that down to a heavily addictive personality. But I think it comes from a good place. And these days, you know, my addictions would be, you know, going to the gym, training, working way too much, and some impulsive spending happens quite regularly. But, you know, you compare that to my 20s, those addictions were, you know, remarkably different. So I think there's a huge correlation, and the work that I'm doing with some founders at the minute with a Grafter is fascinating because addiction comes up time and time again. Not necessarily as far down the road as needing to move into a 12-step place, but it does. But one of the key services that we're launching at the beginning of September is something called the Founder's Journey, which this will sound like totally fucking hippie, but it is all about acceptance. It's about understanding yourself. It's about being able to self-regulate, because if we do work and transform people's businesses from a, you know, a grow and scale perspective, but we don't help transform the founder, then here's the news. They're going to look around. They're not even going to identify that business.
Yes.
And not everybody is up for that journey. You know, that's a different challenge. But for me, I think that's fundamentally missing from anybody's offer working with founders. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think that's incredible work, because genuinely, especially with, you know, tech scale-ups, they are so founder-led that a founder not being able to manage that mental health challenge, the founder not being able to adapt and understand their place in an organization which looks nothing like the one they maybe wanted to build, you know, is going to heavily dictate the successful outcomes there.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really interesting work. So with the companies that you're working with, do they tend to be more traditional businesses, services companies?
Yeah, they're all, at the minute, almost wholesale. They are services companies. And there's reasons behind that. My experience is deeply in the services side. And, you know, I have experience in product, but I don't love it in the same way. For me, product is sunk cash for a long period of time before a return. And I'm yet to see too many businesses that achieve this nirvana of the bloody 75% profit from a product company. So I'm deeply skeptical of that.
Interesting.
What I know for services is you can be shifting revenue from day one. And if you're not, your service is shite and you better have a rethink. And so I'm very comfortable with services businesses, be it, you know, design agencies, PR agencies, recruitment agencies, and businesses like Difrent, where we were doing design and build, development. We're doing some with financial services, data, but the reality is, you know, lots of businesses are not just services or product. plenty of heading into that platform play. So
absolutely, yeah.
we will, by definition, I will need to get with the program in short order and have a look at both sides. But in order, I think, to land and make an impact quickly, I want to play absolutely to my strengths until we start to hire more people in.
That makes total sense. And if you had advice for a founder setting up a business right now with a view to exit, because I actually found it interesting that you said with Difrent, exiting was never actually part of the plan initially.
Oh, no, with Difrent, it was part of the plan.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
With Difrent, it was part of the plan.
Yeah.
Fine. Because for most founders, that is the goal, right? They want to build something in order to sell it. What is the key piece of advice, or some key pieces of advice you'd give to a founder who's just starting out now, maybe very early, just starting to achieve sales? What do you need to be thinking about now when it comes to exiting your business?
That's a great question, and I think it's some of the more boring stuff, unfortunately, but it's some of the making sure documentation, contracts, pipeline, weighted pipeline, clear business strategy, where are you going, what are you doing? That stuff is documented in some shape, way or form, and you're talking to an anti-documenter here, so it's not about being slavishly in that way, but at some point you're going to have to tidy house, and it's a lot easier if you've got a breadcrumb path of where you've come from and what you've been up to.
Yeah.
So I think the documentation is clear, but I talk to so many founders who are not really clear on what the purpose, what the the mission, what the kind of values of the organisation are, and if you can't articulate that, then you can have a real problem selling those services and ultimately selling that business. Now businesses pivot and change. When I first built out Difrent, the reality is in the first 12 months we did work that I knew wasn't going to be our core work because we had to bankroll some of the activity, but we were always going to be user-centered design and build. We just did some bits and pieces that were different. So I think being able to articulate that story is absolutely key, and asking yourself some of those fundamental questions. What is it? What are you doing it for in the first place? And lots of us are scared of those questions.
Yes.
Without going off on a mad therapy session here.
No, let's do it.
Plenty of us are pretty terrified of answering it. When I first had a business mentor going back, I don't know, probably 15 years now. And he's very successful. Sold a couple of businesses. Sold the latest one, I think, to KPMG. But when he said to me, "Rach, what is it that you really want?" I thought, I am never coming back for another discussion with this bloke. It absolutely fucking terrified me. And it took me a good couple of years to really be able to answer that question.
Yes.
And, in my opinion, we need to keep asking ourselves those sort of questions.
I totally agree. And it's a really, really interesting one, because I think it's something I so identify with as well, which is, you have an entrepreneurial spirit, so therefore you feel like you want to build something. But why? Why are you doing that? How much of it is because of, things that you're trying to make up for in other parts of your life? How much is it because you want identity? You want, whatever it might be. It's a really, really interesting one. And I think one of the things I want to discuss, because we mentioned it outside, is potentially the role of psychedelics and, let's call it, plant medicine within the role of understanding where we are within ourselves, understanding what we want, and reconnecting with our values in that way. Because I think where I see a lot of entrepreneurs get in trouble psychologically is when they start disconnecting from mind, body, soul. And it becomes about the business, and everything becomes about that. And your identity becomes the business, and therefore you have this identity crisis, right? So there's a lot there, but, talk to me.
So a couple of bits in that. When I first sold Difrent, I knew that it was. My identity was heavily linked, as much as I had been trying to. I'd gone through the grieving process of accepting I was selling the business. That was my biggest problem in the first 3 months. I was thinking, I don't know who the fuck I am without it. And I don't know how to operate without a diary that has 10 hours of meetings a day, because that spare time I might actually have to look at me. At which point I thought, oof, that's terrifying. So what I did after I sold Difrent was I spent a lot of time in the research around psychedelics. I met an incredible guy called Jonathan De Potter, who runs something called Behold Retreats a couple of years back. And he was running like the ultimate program for the top 1% of entrepreneurs. Now, you know, you could argue that's great marketing and it appealed to the ego. I'm sure it did and does. So anyway, I go on this program. It's supposed to be 6 weeks. But I know with me, I get so consumed by something, I can either rip through it fast as and not really take it in, or I go at it really slowly and I don't want to get through it.
Yes.
And so I found the latter happened with this program. So
Can you tell us about the program? What
yeah,
that
so the program, it's about understanding yourself. It is about it's really about getting back to basics, and, you know, why are we all here in the first place, and, you know, what is the meaning of life. It does sound like, you know, fucking midlife crisis territory.
No, but I think this is something which every entrepreneur will have to face.
And it was a lot about who you are, you know, how you're triggered, self-regulation, all of that, but in a very, very detailed and structured way. And so I'm going through this program and I'm thinking, what I was thinking was, I don't know whether I can take plant medicine, because I'm 9.5 years sober, and I am terrified of it breaching my sobriety. So I sat with that for 12 months. I didn't make a fast decision at all. And, you know, the thought process during that time was, if I've got to take anything, I'd rather take some ecstasy. And then I thought, well, that is not coming from a great place. So, you know, we have to work that one through. But in the end, I decided to take some plant medicine.
And did you start, was it psilocybin, ayahuasca?
Psilocybin. But so as part of this program, I'd paid Behold Retreats to go onto a retreat. I then meet somebody in a work context who I think I want him to take me through plant medicine. So we hadn't met in that context at all. But there was, you know, when you just meet somebody.
Of course. I feel like within this community, people do happen to spot each other, find each other out. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I met this chap, Cameron, and we met in a very different setting, and we talk, and I thought, this is the guy who I want to take me through plant medicine. So it was psilocybin. I'd researched everything to the nth degree, and I went through a journey of talking to loads of CEOs of psychedelic companies, of funds, all over the shop. So I've spoken to bloody loads of them, people who are running retreats, Costa Rica, Thailand, you name it. I've had plenty of convos. And then I went out to Ireland and with a friend of mine, and we went and we did the psilocybin. And the whole concept of this is not you're at a festival and you're dropping some drugs and you're having a big one. It is plant medicine. It's distinctly different, and it's an inward journey.
Absolutely.
So you are meeting yourself, and which for plenty of us is fucking terrifying.
Of course, it's one of the most challenging experiences you can go through, but ultimately one of the most necessary.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful. And I've had probably 20 years of psychotherapy. I'm not afraid to share that at all. So I feel like I've got a reasonable understanding of me these days. However, I would still say, you know, when Cameron says to me, you're going to be laying on this like carpet thing. I think I called it a prayer mat, but I'm sure it wasn't. You're going to be chilling out on this. You know, eye mask on, you're going inward for 4 or 5 hours, you won't move. I looked at all that setup and thought, not a fucking chance. No way in hell. So we take this psilocybin. My mate hasn't moved.
Can I ask what sort of doses you were taking? Do you know?
Yeah, so we were taking a middle-of-the-road dose.
Fine. Okay.
We were not trying to...
You weren't going heroic.
So far from heroic, it's unbelievable.
Okay.
My last experience with hallucinogenics would have been 20 years before taking some LSD on a night out. And I have to say, and I've have an interesting history with substances, but you know, psychedelics, hallucinogenics, not my thing at all. You know, that would be the last thing I would choose to do. So we take this stuff, and it's I really fought it, which was the polar opposite of what I wanted to do.
Interesting.
I was completely, prepared. Everything was set up right.
Yeah.
We're in a cottage in Ireland.
Yeah.
Everything's chill apart from me. And we'd done some meditation beforehand. We journaled. We got the intentions right. You name it. It was right. But I
couldn't surrender.
I couldn't. And the funny thing is, Roy, that my drinking was all about surrender. So I handed over like nobody's business. I didn't want any responsibility. But in the last 9.5 years of being sober, of course, I've learnt a different way of operating. And that instinct kicked in, which wasn't that handy during that circumstance.
I mean, that can make a very challenging experience much more challenging.
Yeah, it was very challenging. So probably the first hour or so, I found it really hard work, maybe longer. But, we had these lilies in a vase. And as I saw these bad boys like coming out across the room at me, I thought, well, fuck me, it's on here. And then I walk into the kitchen and I was struggling to settle down. But I walked into the kitchen and the kitchen cupboards reconfigured around me and I'm watching me. And then I thought, you're completely gone. So you've got no choice, at which point
you're here now.
That was it. And I kind of conceded that it was time to hand over, and then had what I can only describe as the biggest meltdown. Lots of tears for an extended period, and it was this is maybe a strange phrase, but it felt like tears from years ago. So
I know exactly what you mean.
Huge release. And it was uber intense. The chap who looked after us was, he was amazing. But I guess the thing for me wasn't so much that night, which will sound even more strange. I said to Cameron before I did it, well, what I actually said is, if I come back a vegan, I'm going to be kicking off, mate, because I might as well be honest about that. I then proceeded 8 or 9 months of not eating meat at all, which I found really strange. Talking to somebody who, would happily be down gauchos on a regular. So I found that quite strange, but it wasn't a conscious. It was just, it didn't appeal. You're at a restaurant, didn't appeal. And the emotion for the first few weeks was unlike anything I could ever describe. And I know close friends were a bit kind of concerned. They were like, what the hell? Is she okay? So I found it very intense. But I have to say, I think it is one of the most incredible experiences of my entire life. Also one of the most terrifying. And I've thought long and hard about whether... I fancy doing it again, but I don't think plant medicine works like that. When it's time, it will call to you.
100%.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And not until your brain doesn't tell you you're up for it. It tells you it's kind of coming for you.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and I think it's such an important point to make here, which is why people do see this as plant medicine. Is this is not something which you wouldn't do that every week. You wouldn't want to do that every week.
Not a bit of it.
So I had my first experience of psilocybin when I just turned 17. And, I was not prepared at all in terms of coming into that and not knowing really much. I was 17, thought it was Billy Big Bollocks in Amsterdam, right?
Of course. Standard.
Yeah, exactly. And took probably 3.5 grams.
Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Which was
That's terrifying.
Yeah. Especially when I thought I was going to see some nice colours and that was going to be what my experience was. And it was a really, and I had many difficult moments in childhood and everything else. And there were so many things that were so buried down at a subconscious and unconscious level. And it's really interesting when you look at the neurological impact of psilocybin.
Yep.
I mean, what's happening is your conscious mind is making connections with your sub and an unconscious mind. So you're able to open things up which are causing you trauma, causing you issues which you don't even necessarily know were there, because they're so buried so far down. And I did not have another psychedelic or psilocybin experience for 12 years after that.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Right, because it's it's not something you would do regularly. However, what I'm finding now, and I think now as people are educating themselves a bit more about the potential of usage for this with treating PTSD, depression, etc. I mean, it's amazing, and some of the research that's coming out of this now a lot of people are calling this a panacea, and it's amazing to see the outcomes it can have.
I think the interesting bit there, and I've looked at lots of the evidence, 10 years, 15 years working in healthcare, and not a clinician, but I've looked at lots and lots of that, especially around addiction as well. And the bit for me is providing we put that in conjunction with, you can call it integration or you can call it therapy. But, the area that makes me nervous are some of the places that are, selling a dose. I mean, I'm not quite talking buying it off Insta, but, selling a dose and, call as if there's a problem. That stuff makes me very nervous.
Totally.
Because I think,
it's got to be treated with real respect and care.
Absolutely. And these are very powerful. And I guess that was the, that sits at the heart of why I was so nervous. If someone's to say, what's your biggest fear? Losing my mind is my biggest fear.
Sure.
So I was thinking, God, I don't want to be getting trapped in there.
Yes.
Which would actually be my worst nightmare.
For all of us, right?
Yeah, of course. But no, I think there's, I deeply believe that there is something incredibly powerful that we will start to benefit from the use of.
Yeah, I think so, and it's great to see the amount of new businesses in the space. And there's I think Conscious Ventures in the UK is one of the one of the big investors in psychedelics here. But it has been really exciting to see the way that people are now taking something which ultimately has been consumed by humans for thousands and thousands of years, and probably has a big role in helping evolve consciousness in a really, really positive way. So I think it's a really exciting area to look at. So there are 5 questions that I ask every single guest that I would love to run through with you.
I wish I was prepared for these, but
no
far
worries
away.
at all. And they're not quick fire or anything. We'll just talk through them. So the first question I have for you is, what is the single biggest risk you've ever taken, and what was the outcome?
I think the single biggest risk for me was around public speaking. So I was petrified. If you'd spoken to me 10 years ago and said, Rach, you're going to rock up on a stage, I'd rather have thrown myself through a closed window. So I think that was probably, from a personal perspective, I'd say that's probably the biggest risk, because, there's obviously something deep in me that was just not up for it on any level, but I knew it was holding me back in my career. So, I guess, I believed if I could overcome it, that I'd love it. And this goes back to the masochistic bit. I don't just want to be good at it. I want to be fucking brilliant at it. And so the amount of pressure that I put on. So I would say, and I know the first event I did, and I can still feel it in my stomach. But I did a CIO event, at a hotel near to Embankment. I can't remember the name of it. And there was about 300 CIOs in the room, predominantly boys. They often are. And the one thing I'm saying to myself as I'm walking to the stage is, don't make an inappropriate gag about the fact it's a heavily male audience. So, of course, I get on the stage and I'm like, it's like a sausage factory out there. Anyway, they all found it quite funny.
Great.
So at which point I was away. But I would say that's probably the biggest risk. There's a lot of things that jump into my head.
Sure.
When you ask that question. But I think that's probably it for me.
Yeah, no, I can. If you're not happy or feeling happy about public speaking, it's like the scariest thing that
terrifying.
You can do. Was there anything that you did specifically to prepare for that, or was it just...
I just forced me to do it, and it wasn't gentle, probably wasn't the right approach, but it would have been the only way that I would have got me to do it. And that what lasted for a long period of time. That wasn't a 5 minutes, that was years of you will fucking do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was harsh.
And then did you find, because so I used to do stand-up.
Really?
Yeah,
wow, I've always fancied doing that.
It's amazing. And also we talk about ego death. I mean, you want to be... So I was 26, had just sold my company, probably thought a bit too much of myself, and that everything I touched would have...
turned to gold.
100%.
Yeah.
try doing stand-up, right? Try bombing in front of 100 people. You will remember very quickly that you are nothing, you know?
It's funny because I did some after-dinner speaking and I dislike that immensely. It's not my time. So I'm best in the morning. Someone wants a bit of after-dinner speaking at 8 a.m. I'm your girl. Someone wants 10 p.m. I'd rather be in bed. And everyone's also wankered. And I'm like, no, this is not for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then did you find that once you did that first public speaking, because obviously now I know you do a lot of it, was it something that was like, actually, this is just a great feeling, or actually it was just more, I'm not scared of this, so I can do it, or did you find like a real inclination for it after?
No, it didn't happen overnight.
Okay.
So I thought, thank fuck I've got through it. I haven't actually had a heart attack and died.
Yeah.
Bit by bit over the years, it's got more and more bearable. And now I would go as far as to say I absolutely love it.
Nice.
But it has, and it still makes me nervous. And I think, that's right. It should. But what I guess my journey around that went from can I get through it to now I actually care. Am I giving the people, who are there listening to me to, talk something of value? At the start, what they needed was the last thought in my head. I was just thinking, I just need to get through this. So that's kind of evolved.
Yeah. Okay. Really, really interesting. Thank you for that. Next question for you is, what are you proudest of?
What am I proudest of? So this one wouldn't be work related. So
Right.
this is my stepdaughter Charlotte got sick with meningococcal septicemia when she was 14.
Wow.
So she is a triple amputee as a result, and has had one kidney transplant already and is waiting on another.
Wow.
So what I would say I'm proudest of is how she just fucking shows up. Do you know what I mean? She just keeps on going. I think plenty of people would have said, fuck this, long time ago. So yeah, Charlotte.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you even meet someone like that, let alone spend as much time with her as I'm sure you do, it's just so inspirational, right? When you see people being able to unlock a mindset despite all of those things, like genuinely, it's the most incredible interactions you have.
Absolutely crazy. And she, Charlotte, like genuinely is interested, cares about other people. I have to say, I think, I would probably be a little more interested purely in myself. But no, she's incredible.
Wow, amazing. Okay. Is there anything you wish you did differently?
I think I can't say yes to that because it's made me who I am today. And the reality is, what crossed my mind is, should I have stopped the drinking earlier? It wasn't my time. Do you know what I mean? It was my time to absolutely kick the arse out of it and then knock it on the head. My personality is not moderate, and it's never going to be. And I'm fine with that. I accept that. So no, I don't think I would have changed anything. Great.
Love that. It's a great answer. Okay. In your mind, what does it take to be successful?
Hard fucking work. It's hard work. So hard work comes in lots of different ways. It's hard work mentally. It's actually putting a proper shift in. It's not appearing for an hour and thinking you put a fucking shift in. It's hard work. I think that is the key to success, really. I think for me personally, consistency is part of my story. I like to think I'm a free spirit, but the reality is if I don't have, consistency and a decent structure, shit goes like mental quite quickly. But I've learnt that over the years. But yeah, for me, it's hard work.
So for any founder listening to this who's setting out, and it's a really interesting one because I think entrepreneur, founder, these are things which were not necessarily cool 10 years ago, and now everyone wants to do it.
Yep.
And I think it's the responsibility of people who have been there, done that, such as ourselves, to educate the new generation coming through on what the realities of that is. So when you say hard work, what does that look like? And for a young founder now thinking about setting up a business who needs to know the reality of what that means.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it is a lot of actual working hours and days and months. So if things came really easily, I don't think any of us would respect them at all. And I think that, if you are building a business, you need to strap in for the fact that you're not going to be buying a fucking Ferrari in half an hour. You're not going to be, wanking around in a private jet. It may happen at some point, but it's years down the road. And none of this stuff is instant. I had a good conversation with my middle brother. All of us are entrepreneurs. As I thought about building Difrent, and he said, you can put a massive day rate as an interim doing turnaround. Don't do it. Why do it? It's a massive fucking drainer. And it's a huge amount of work, and there's an easier way to make the money. But we're all competitive, and I was definitely up for doing it again. But I think, Connor's 18 years into his company. He has more staying power than me, obviously. But the reality is, it's a lot of seriously hard work. And I'm half tempted to talk about how I see the kind of younger generation expecting things to happen a bit faster.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether that was the same, when I was growing up. I wasn't the most patient, and I'm still not. So I don't think it's necessarily that. But I do think that as a collective, we all expect everything instantaneously, and I know I do. If I'm ordering something on Amazon, why the fuck isn't it here 3 hours later? So you imagine you're an entrepreneur and you think success is going to land at that speed, and I'm going to have X amount of followers, and I'm going to launch a new product, and it's going to be flying off the shelves. This stuff takes time and a lot of hard work.
One of my favorite sayings is, it takes 10 years to blow up overnight.
It's a great phrase, and never a truer set of words.
Yeah, it's all the hard work that goes in for years, which people assume didn't happen.
And the mistakes.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's a really, really interesting point, because you're right. We are so impatient now because the level of convenience that we have to have anything
is epic.
It's just epic, and it's amazing. But you're right. It's like, I remember if I wanted to get something done when I was 17, it would take you 4 or 5 hours. You got to go here, you got to do this, you got to do that. Like, that was just the reality of getting things done.
Yeah, I mean, me at 17, I would have got my first mobile phone. It was a proper unit with an aerial that was about 8 foot tall. But, we actually legitimately were down the phone box, phoning mates, going, we'll meet you down here. I mean, everything was slower.
Yeah. And it's amazing to see how quickly we adapt to the pace, and it's great, but how quickly we forget that, how quickly we would fall apart without that now, even though we did it for hundreds and hundreds of years before, but we would fall apart without that convenience right now. But you're right. I think it will lead to a lot of disappointment for a lot of people who don't realize that actually, when it comes to entrepreneurialism, you're not going to get that convenience. You're not going to get that instant gratification there. No,
and my worry with getting it that fast is that you won't respect it. I think that's why it's hard. It's that trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, my last question for you is, 15-year-old Rachel walks in the room right now. What are you going to tell her?
Oh, God. This is the hardest question.
So I save it for the end.
I am going to tell her that it's going to be all right. That's what I'm going to tell her. My instinct was, go along the line of, don't cane it as much, but I wouldn't fucking tell her that. And she'd also just laugh and flounce out the door. So, it's going to be okay. Amazing. It's hard, man. It's hard being 15.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't, if somebody said you can go back, I often say 16 to 18, like the biggest laugh. Me and my mates, we're absolute caners. We loved it. But fuck, it's difficult, isn't it? It's so difficult. And you don't understand yourself at all. But yet you think you know it all, which is even more dangerous. So, yeah, I would tell her it's going to be all right.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. And it's funny because I, when I think back to being sort of like 25, 26, I was so scared about turning 30 and getting older and everything else. But it's genuinely, I think...
Try being 45.
Right, yeah. But I'm actually really interested in this because for me, so I'm about to turn 32. And for me, like, the fact that I just am so much more comfortable and knowing myself and all these things, I feel like actually when you can have that approach to life, like, aging is actually only a good thing.
Yeah.
Every year, surely it gets, easier. Know yourself, know what you're about, know the values.
200%. But I think if you had that knowledge, if I had this confidence at 20, fuck, I would have been dangerous.
Yeah.
So there's a reason it arrived 25 years later. It all has to be in balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Rachel, where can people find you and what do you want to plug?
So where people can find me is, so the website is thegrafter.com. And I am at rachmurph.com on Twitter or X. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on pretty much everything. So that's where they can find me.
Amazing. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Brill, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching the episode. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit subscribe below so that you can support the podcast and we can keep on bringing you amazing new guests. If you want to see the other amazing episodes in this podcast, click into our series section. As ever, if there are any other guests or topics you want us to explore, just let me know in the comments and we'll do our best to bring someone in.